Hello and welcome to This Sustainable Life's Business Plan. This is Joshua Spodek. Let me jump right in. First, I'm going to give you the table of contents and then a bit of why I'm doing a video instead of the traditional written form. I'll start off with the context. What world are we walking into that This Sustainable Life is addressing? Our story, the competition, what we're competing against, what we're not competing against, what the playing field is, the problem and the solution, and also what problems we're not addressing, specifically what we are doing, what we believe we're going to solve. Our strategy, the team, the project, and the use of funds, the specific things that we're going to do, and then our offer. Let me start at the very highest level, the preview of the offer. This is what's going to come at the end. But we believe that we are doing essential, effective work that no one else is. This works, and we're going to show how it works on one of the most important issues of our species. We are a team of experienced, connected, dedicated professionals. So far, we're volunteering, and we've reached the limit of what we can do as volunteers. It's time really to dedicate ourselves to this project or these projects. We've grown, and we see tremendous opportunity to reach more people more effectively, including, this is what the main use of funds will be, through a TV series, which we believe can make a very big difference. There's a message that has to get out there. We are seeking about $200,000 in tax-deductible funds. We have a nonprofit through the development stage of the TV show, as well as the other projects we'll be doing at the same time. And then when we begin production, it will be about a couple $1 million. We hope that you will support us however you can. Let's jump into the context. I'm going to start with a few stories, a couple different ways. The first story is about elk. I have a friend, Kevin, who moved out to a home in Idaho. It was the first time he ever saw elk. One time he was sitting at a neighbor's place, and the neighbor lived out there for a long time, was a hunter. Some elk were off in the distance, and the hunter said to Kevin, "In that group of elk over there, about how many do you see?" And Kevin said, "Oh, about 100. The hunter said, "Yeah, I'd guess about that. I've lived here a long time. The vegetation around here can support about 75 elk over the winter." Kevin said, "I guess that means over the winter about 25 of the elk are going to die." The hunter said, "No. Over the winter, 25 are going to live." This took me a second to process, and Kevin explained to me, the elk don't look at the vegetation, figure out how many of them can live, and say to 25, "Hey, take one for the team and just die." No, they all eat, and soon enough, there's enough for 74 over the winter, but there's still 100 of them. Later, there's enough for 73 over the winter, but there's still 100 of them. And by the time February, March come around, the ones that are left are emaciated and barely make it, and something like 25 of them make it. So it's a ratio of, even though there's enough for 75 at the beginning, 25% make it. It could be that the hunter has some personal interest here, a bias, to say, I'm not culling 25 when I hunt a few, I'm saving 50. That could be, but I believe him. Now, as I process that, I work with people a lot more than I work with elk. And I said to Kevin, ask the hunter next time you see him, what happens if humans have 25% too little resources for us? Because of the many differences between elk and human, I'll tell you a couple big ones. One of them is that elk don't have machine guns, they don't have nuclear weapons, they don't have maps with lines that if you cross it, it's an act of war, and the whole groups will go against whole other groups. So it's possible, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's possible that maybe it's more of a 90-10 split with humans because of our weapons and so forth. That maybe if there's 10% too little resources or too few resources, that we'll end up with 10% of the population at the end. There's another difference between humans and elk, that as far as I can tell, they can't predict the future. And as far as I can tell, they don't have empathy and compassion that we do. So I can also see that we could foresee these problems happening and do something about it. Now that's one way of telling the story about elk. Here's another way of telling the same story. Limits to Growth is a book that I found very useful in understanding our interaction with our environment. Here are some graphs in the book talking about carrying capacity versus population, which is kind of what he was talking about. If our population keeps going up and up and up, as it is, and our carrying capacity keeps going up, no problem. But that's not how most people think of it. I think most people think that the carrying capacity of the planet is, 10 billion, 12 billion, something like that, and we'll go up and kind of even off. And that would be a nice outcome. Another outcome is that the population could go up, go over and above what the carrying capacity can sustain and kind of oscillate, or it could do overshoot, meaning going up way too high, and when the elk are up really high and they're eating a lot, then there's not enough to support even the number that it could support before, and the population drops to well below that peak. Now, I'm a physicist. I have a PhD in physics. I understand graphs. This makes a whole lot of sense to me. I think most people don't understand graphs. And if you show this to people, they don't really get it. And in fact, historically, people didn't understand what this book was about. But even these graphs, simple as they may seem to me, as complex they are for most people, this is what they actually present as, these are just illustrations, but these are projections. Well, they're not even projections. See, if you look in here, here's the population. See, it says population. And then here is the resources. And as you can see, that drops. But there's about 10 other variables in 3 different graphs. And for most people, this is super complicated. Most people who read the book didn't get it. Some who got it never chose anything remotely like to do anything about it. And a lot of people deliberately misinterpreted it. But how do you understand this? The book actually has 3 pages of just how to read one of those sets of graphs. Historically, this is what scientists, educators, people go out and tell the world. And I believe that this is very difficult for people to understand, not very effective at getting people to understand the concepts of overshoot and collapse. Whereas this hunter knew it from personal experience, and I believe is a more compelling story. But that story has not been told. This story has, and I don't think it works very well. As much as with a background in science, I think this is very useful, but to understand, but not to lead with, not to change people's behavior. Here's another story. Nelson Mandela, as you know, he was in prison for 27 years on Robben Island. He was fighting apartheid. When he was there, you may know that he befriended the prison guards. Many people saw the challenge or the struggle between blacks and whites. Not Nelson Mandela. He saw it between apartheid and not apartheid. And he saw people in apartheid, even if they were white, were not apartheid itself. They were people just like him, and he befriended them. He learned Afrikaans. It was not the language of his oppressor. It was the language of people around him, so that he and they could work together. Eventually, they did. And ultimately, he and de Klerk won the Nobel Peace Prize. He became president of a nation that was apartheid against him. Now, as an aside, I have to mention, also while he was in prison, for his 70th birthday, there was a birthday party for him that hundreds of millions of people attended all around the world. I say this in passing, not quite in passing, but he is a huge role model for me, an inspiration for me of what people can do under lockdown. We've been locked down less than a year. People are complaining. He was locked down for 27 years. And look at this birthday party they had. But more to the point, he didn't see other people as the problem. He saw other people as people just like him. The system of apartheid was the problem. Now let me tell the story another different way. Here's how scientists often look at systems. And this, again, as a scientist, makes a lot of sense to me. There's stocks of resources, there's an environment window, there's buffers of unallocated resources and time, there's a system window, there's all these things. And this is how to understand a system as scientists and engineers might understand it. Now it can be simplified. Here's how a lot of people think about it. Traditionally, there's cause and effect. Systems, there's lots of causes and other effects that can interact with each other. And often there's something in the middle, something more like this. This is actually how I learned a lot of systems thinking, that you have these diagrams and things of how to explain it. Again, this type of story has been spread a lot. But I think it's very difficult for the average person to really get that stuff. Whereas if you look at Mandela, he didn't look at people as the problem. The system was the problem. He separated elements within a system from the system itself. We have a world economic system that pollutes a lot. The people within that system are not necessarily the problem. There may be people who are deliberately polluting, but mostly they're participating in a system just like the warders did. And when you get them on your side, when you see the common interests, you can change the system together, as Mandela did with de Klerk. I'm illustrating here differences between management and leadership. Martin Luther King, he didn't say, I have a 4-point plan. That would be management. He did have plans. He did have specific plans and tactics. But what he actually said that roused people, that stands the test of time, is, I have a dream. And that's leadership. I believe that there's very little leadership in the area of sustainability, in the area of the environment. What do I mean by the difference between management and leadership? I'm going to go through a couple different differences. There's a lot of overlap, but let's look at some of the differences. Managers work with measurable, observable deliverables, things that you can observe and measure very easily, whereas leaders work mainly with intangibles, things like emotions, beliefs, stories, images, and symbols. I'm not saying one is more important than the other. I'm not saying one is less important than the other. They're both very important, but they're complementary skills and areas of influencing people. The goal of a manager is to get compliance. A very effective manager, people will comply with that management. A leader inspires. Managers work in the system. They make it more efficient. Leaders work on a system. They can change it. Again, if you want to change a system, you need both of these things, not just one. The role of a manager is to motivate, to work with incentives. Often you call it carrots and sticks. If you do it, I'll pay you. If you don't, I'll fire you. Leaders work, they help others to do what they already want, but haven't figured out how. If people know how to do what the project that they want to do, they don't need a leader necessarily, but a leader helps them. It may help an individual figure out what they really want. It may help a group work together. The skills of a manager: analysis, planning, record keeping, organization, very important. Of a leader, it's vision, listening, support. How do you know to support someone if you don't listen to them and understand what their values are? Charisma and credibility. Complementary skills, oftentimes one person has them, both sets. Sometimes you need a team of people, some having one, some having the other. Managers, their experience is widely transferable. You can manage very well in one company and then switch to another company that does something totally different. It works. Leaders, they generally must have done or be doing what they're leading others to do. It's very difficult to lead someone to do something when you're telling them one thing and you're doing something else. Managers don't necessarily have to go through a personal transformation. They don't have to love what they do. They can be very effective at it and not really care about it. Leaders, it's almost necessary that they go through some sort of personal transformation, that what they do, they deeply care about. It doesn't have to be crucible. That's what it says here. It doesn't have to be crucible, but it often is. There's often some sort of revelatory experience where they feel like, I must do this. Now that I see what's going on, now that I see this pollution in this other part of the world that's a result of a system that I'm in, I must work on it. I must change this. Everyone knows our environmental problems. These things don't happen on their own. I don't have to go through. You've read the headlines. I don't have to talk to you about carbon dioxide and mercury and plastic. You've read the headlines. It's front page news, and it has been for decades. These things don't happen on their own. Carbon dioxide doesn't have volition. It doesn't do its own thing. It responds to us. Plastic doesn't have a mind of its own. These things result from our behavior, and our behavior results from stories, beliefs, culture. Changing culture requires leadership and management, both. But we've mostly seen only management. Not people working on the system, but people working within the system. That's what efficiency is. Recycling doesn't change a system, it just makes a system more efficient. To change a system requires leadership and management. Now, if you have leadership without management, it's dreamers. People who talk big, nothing ever happens. Management without leadership, you might get a bureaucracy that's very effective. I mean, if I want a driver's license, I go to the DMV. I don't want the DMV doing crazy system-changing things. I want them getting me a driver's license. Management without leadership, you get a bureaucracy. Both of them together, you can get things done. Now I want to illustrate what's missing from sustainability. There's management and there's leadership, and there's areas of sustainability, and there's other fields. So let's look at other fields in management. There are many people, most people work in this area if they manage someone. They work in some area that's not really affecting the environment, and they don't really change systems. They don't really work on what leaders do. Now, in the area of leadership, there are some great historical leaders. You can name many of them, but in various different fields. There's politics, arts, sport, civil rights, business, the military, culture, medicine. I can name many different fields. And so you know great historical leaders, and we learn from them, and hopefully we become better as a society for them. Now, in the area of sustainability, there are a few managers, people who are trying to get us to be more efficient, for example, Al Gore, Leonardo DiCaprio, and countless scientists, educators, journalists, politicians, lots of other people. Now, in the area of leadership and sustainability, Greta Thunberg, I believe she's leading in some way. She's young and she's calling for people to panic, which is not exactly leading. She's very young. I believe that by the time she's my age, she's going to be far more of the leader than I've ever been. I hope. She's voicing things that people dreamt of voicing and getting that heard. Is she leading people? Maybe. Michai Viravaidya, I'll talk about him in a little bit. Anybody else? Can you think of people who are leaders in the area of the environment? People are really changing things, especially on a national or global scale. It's pretty thin picking, if anyone. That presents an opportunity. This is the sustainable competitive advantage that's going to drive this sustainable life, this project that I'm talking to you about. The thing is that there's a huge leadership gap, and there's a huge leadership demand. People want to act, very few want to act first. They want someone to show them the way. They want a vision so that what they do isn't hopeless, isn't futile. And the opportunity, what we at This Sustainable Life believe is the opportunity is to bring great leadership to sustainability. There are great leaders historical. We're not learning from them in the area of leadership. We're talking about a lot of graphs and facts and figures and doom and gloom. but not stories and images and so forth. And what's the role that we do? Is to support the sustainability managers. And we hope that they're very successful, and we want to make them more successful. We want to get them votes. We want to support sustainability managers. Now, with that context, I want to go and tell a few more stories. The guy in the middle there, he's got a hula hoop around him. His name is Dennis Meadows. He's one of the authors of Limits to Growth. He's teaching or doing a session. This is on YouTube. You can download this. Ask me for the link and I'll send it to you. And he's doing a corporate presentation on systems thinking. So he gets 5 people up from the audience. And that hula hoop there, he said, I'm not sure if you can see me in the video, but he says, put out your fingers. And he puts a hula hoop on everyone's fingers and says, you can't hold it. You can only support it from below. And when he says go, the goal is to lower the hula hoop to the floor as fast as possible. But he says, if anyone moves their hand too fast so that their finger comes out of contact with the hula hoop, he will chastise that person and say, you messed up. You messed up bad. You're wrong and you're bad. And he's going to raise the hula hoop back up again. Then everyone has to start again and lower it again. And the goal again is to get it to the ground as fast as possible. But if anyone moves too fast, he'll chastise them and start all over again. Now, there are many, many differences between a global economic system and hula hoops. But I'll say 2 things that ring true in this for me. One is that we can lower the amount that we pollute, but it's very difficult for us to undo the amount that we pollute. So if you think of greenhouse gas emissions, we can plant a tree, but on the scale of what we put out, that's very little. So basically, we can lower how much we put out, but we can't actually take anything out of the atmosphere. It just has to happen on natural timescales. So that's why you can only hold it from below, not grasp it from above. Also, I can tell you, you might know about me, I'm in my 5th year of not flying. I take over a year to fill up 1 load of garbage. And some people say, Josh, you're so extreme. What you do, no one else can do that sort of thing. What you do, it's too hard. It's too out there. It's too extreme. So there, you get chastised if you go ahead of the pack too much. So before Dennis says go, he says to the audience, and I'm going to ask you, I can't hear you, but think about it. What do you think will happen when he says go? Reflect a bit. Some people say, well, it'll go down very slowly. Some people say they'll look at each other and try to figure out a plan and then act on the plan together. Some people say it'll go down slow. Some people lose contact and then he'll reset it. Various different predictions. And then Dennis says, okay, how long do you think it'll take for the hula hoop to get to the ground? Because that's the goal. People say 30 seconds, a minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. You can watch the video. And I've asked a lot of people this. Not one person has guessed what actually happens. When Dennis says go, the hula hoop goes up. When I tell this to people, a lot of people say, Josh, what's happened? They're asking me. I don't know any more than anyone else about human nature or anything like that. All I know is that that's what happens. You can see what happens. It goes up fast enough that they're surprised, but slow enough that they could stop. You see this guy, his hand stopped, but 2 or 3 of them, they still keep it going up. And look at the surprise on her face, if you can see it. They're like, what's going on? They can't stop themselves from moving it up. Even the people who stop don't stop that it goes up. And this to me represents what's happening environmentally. He's captured some of the things about our economic system, that no one wants to go too fast. And the result is that there's a little bit of push upward, and as it goes up, they don't want to let go, and so they keep pushing it up and up and up. That story to me rings true viscerally because I was shocked when I saw it, and everyone I tell is shocked when they hear it. I could say it another way. I could say it in words. Systems often do the opposite of what each person in that system intends. That's not quite so visceral or graphic. It doesn't get you in the gut so much, not in my experience. It just sounds like abstract words, kind of academic. I could say it another way. By creating a new supply, recycling can lower costs and increase waste. It's not exactly the same, but people can try to lower emissions or try to lower waste by recycling. But recycling can increase total waste because it doesn't lower the creation of virgin plastic. It just shuffles around the old stuff. Anyone who's bought a single wrapped apple in plastic from a store knows that when the prices drop because of increased supply, supply and demand, if you increase recycling, then there's virgin plastic plus the recycled plastic, which means prices are going to drop. People use plastic for things they didn't use before. It can actually drive up waste. I can put it another way. Making a polluting system more efficient produces waste more efficiently. If you make a system more efficient, but you don't change it, you produce that system's outputs more efficiently. And our problem isn't that our world is too little efficient. In fact, we're more efficient than ever. We're also producing more total waste than ever. That's what's choking our oceans. That's what makes 10 million people a year die of pollution. But that's really abstract to me. I think the hula hoop illustrates it much more, but no one's sharing the hula hoop story. I mean, very rarely. This Sustainable Life, one of our main missions is to get these stories across. Here's another story. The steam engine, the Watt steam engine, often hailed as what began the Industrial Revolution. Now, Watt didn't invent the steam engine. He made one that was simply more efficient than any before. People saw, okay, what were steam engines used for? They would pump water out of mines, often mines to get coal. And people thought, all right, if it's more efficient, coal use should go down. It went up. It went up because people found more uses for the steam engine, and so more people used the steam engine for more things. For example, you could put a steam engine on a vehicle and the vehicle could go, and that would save people energy, save people their own personal energy. Eventually that turned into locomotives and whole locomotive systems, so coal use kept going up and up and up and up. Likewise, you could attach it to a loom and have a powered loom, or you could attach it to a whole bunch of looms and have a whole textile factory all built on steam. In economics speak, you'd say you have to look at the demand curve. What do people want to use something for, and what, if you lower the price, do you enable more people to use that they couldn't use before? And it didn't stop there. That was just in those times, in the 18th, 19th centuries. But today, fast forward, this is our world. It's using coal and other fossil fuels for more and more uses. And you have all these unintended side effects that people didn't think of. Cars were supposed to give us liberty and save us time. Well, in some cases they do, but by and large, the net effect is that it looks like there's a lot of traffic jams. And it was supposed to bring people together, but we have all these unintended side effects of wars and things like that that end up polluting our world more and more. You could put this another way. Perpetually missing the unintended side effects of growth, efficiency, and externalizing costs produce all these unintended side effects. People hear that, but they don't really get it. Okay, there's unintended side effects, but whatever, it doesn't affect me. People keep looking for the intended side effects. But the message of what actually happens gets lost. And I believe that is a leadership story, a set of images that right now are not in people's minds. Here's another story. Hawaii. Hawaii was discovered by the Polynesians something like 1,000 years ago. We don't know exactly when. Apparently, the archaeological record shows that for some time there was trade between the Polynesian islands and Hawaii. And in that time, the archaeological record shows that the Hawaiian territory, the land, was less able to sustain life and human society. It was degrading. Then, for some reason, trade with Polynesia stopped, and the Hawaiians were on their own. The archaeological record shows that between that time and when the Europeans arrived, the land's ability to sustain life in human society increased. Now, I wasn't there. I can't tell exactly what happened, but my understanding is that they realized we don't have any other resources. It's this or nothing. So they learned how to steward the land, how to be regenerative. So that when the Europeans arrived there, they had stringent rules about many things of what you could do with some land and what you couldn't do with some species and so forth, like some types of birds you couldn't touch. They were able to sustain themselves for centuries, certainly longer than since the steam engine until now. This is a major reason for me for hope, that they didn't believe you must have growth or everything will fall apart. They were able to stay stable and peaceful. W. Edwards Deming wrote a book called Out of the Crisis, several others. I'm not going to give the full story on this one. I like him because he was a physicist who went into business. His first foray into the world was outside of academia was in the US Census in the 30s. He helped transform going from door to door to door, every single house in the country, to statistically sampling and showing that you could get better accuracy with much less effort. That same systems perspective that he brought in, he brought to the war when we had to switch factories from producing cars and washing machines to making tanks and airplanes. He brought that same statistical sampling approach, that systems approach, to the factories and had got them to produce higher quality, higher output, higher morale at lower cost. One of these things like cracking the Enigma code or developing radar that helped us win the war despite being far from the front lines. After the war, in 1950, he ended up in Japan. He brought the same technique there, the same systems approach. Japan was totally bombed out. Their culture is famously insular. Their industry was known for cheap, low-quality junk. He came in and they adopted his way of working, his systems approach. And he said to them, if you follow my recommendations, you're going to capture markets the world over within 5 years. And in 4 years, the world over, countries are putting up protectionist tariffs because they were producing such high quality, low-cost goods. He turned the place around, not single-handedly, but that systems approach. A leader works on systems, not just within systems. In 1960, 10 years later, the Emperor of Japan gave him the highest award Japan can bestow on a foreigner. And sometime after that, back in the United States, Ford brought him in, and next thing you know, the Taurus comes out and becomes the best-selling car in America. He transformed America, Japan, America, and not many people know him, but he was a leader in bringing a systems approach that worked on systems to transform several different places. Now notice, he transformed a nation in 4 years. I'm sure you've read the headlines that say we have to transform our world in 10 years or we'll have irreversible things that happen that we can't undo. Well, we're looking at the scale that we need to do it in a time frame that we need to do it. This is a story that is not very well told that I believe is important for us to know about. Here's another story. The man you see here, Colonel Mark Reed, is a leader of a department at West Point. He was a guest on my podcast. I asked my guests to share an environmental value of theirs and to act on that value. A value of theirs, not something I tell them to do. And he said, Josh, for 1 month, I'm going to commit, and he had to ask his wife and kids if they would go for this, and they did. I'm going to commit to producing half the amount of garbage I normally do for 1 month. As it turned out, that month was December 2018. December means Christmas. And he didn't think of that at the beginning, and then he realized we've committed to something. Christmas generally produces a lot of waste because of all the gifts. So he got his family together and said, what are we going to do? Because we committed to this. But, well, the first thing they came up with was no wrapping paper. That'll reduce the waste. And the more they thought about it, more as a family, they came up with more and more things. And they said, instead of gifts, we as a family are going to go and take a roughly staycation. They went to a hotel resort near them, and they spent that time together. He said, Josh, you have to ask them to get their opinions, but I believe I speak for everyone in the family. This was our best Christmas ever. I spoke to him in January after this. Not despite no gifts, but because of no gifts. And I call Mark my one-man wrecking crew because I talk to a lot of people about reducing their consumption and their impact on the world. And there are a lot of excuses that people give me as to why, other people can act, but I can't. Family, I've got family obligations and things like that. Work, I can't do it because of work. Or my culture, it just doesn't allow that. I've heard senators and politicians talk about America. We will always be big and always be growing and bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, I don't know anyone who loves his family more than Mark, loves his country more than Mark, anyone his job that he's put his life on the line for is to defend this nation, and he will not do anything to get in the way of that. Despite all of these things, he produced less waste and brought his family closer. And Christmas, for many people, is a materially giving holiday, and he had less material giving, but more total giving. And for that matter, he brings the cadets to his house, and I've kept in touch with him after this, and as a result of this, he shares with the cadets how they can waste less while defending the country more effectively. He's just one person who's been on my podcast, and he's put me in touch with other people, and lots of guests on my podcast put me in touch with other people, to the point where you don't have to look at all the names here. But these are some of the most downloaded episodes on the podcast, and here's a few. Anna Tobias, an Olympic gold medalist. She won the CrossFit Games. Dominic, McKinsey's 3-time global managing director, a major figure in business, a leader in business. Eric Adams, Brooklyn's borough president. Now, Brooklyn would be, if it was a city, it would be the 3rd largest city in the country. So a major politician. Seth won the Nobel Peace Prize. General Paul Van Riper, a Marine Corps 3-star general. Coleman Hughes, here he is speaking to Congress, testifying to Congress, while he was still in college, before he graduated. So people from all different ages, from all different political backgrounds. He's a cultural leader. And coming soon, I hope, the strategy, as I'll describe in a bit for the Sustainable Life, the podcast part, is major figures like Oprah, LeBron, Madonna, Serena. Now, these are entertainers, athletes, and I'll say later why the strategy leads to bringing people like them. But this is the direction of the podcast and the success that we've been having so far and the success that we want to build on. That brings me to the story of the Sustainable Life. How did it come to be? Really, to go back to context, it's the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, besides the steam engine, it brought us certain values that are major values that this country lives by. Growth, especially GDP growth, population growth. Efficiency, externalizing costs. If we can dump something out the back, well, historically we've done that. We value comfort and convenience. That's what the steam engines are for. And that's what our market, a lot of it is about. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, the material quality of life improved a lot. And there was a little waste. Historically, there was a lot of quality of life improvement and a bit of waste, but the waste wasn't so bad because the earth is big, and if any place got polluted, we could always move to some other place. But over the years, these things reversed, that now the waste is a much bigger issue. The quality of life is not particularly improving much compared to before. There are improvements, of course, but not nearly like it was before. And one example of this is that we have so much material stuff that this is for the first time in 2 centuries, the current generation of children in America may have shorter lifespans than their parents. That's what's happened. As for me personally, you may know I have 5 Ivy League degrees. Here I'm getting one at Columbia. One of them is a PhD in physics. I worked on the XMM satellite, and so I have a view of science. I don't think anyone totally understands all the environmental science, but I think I understand it pretty well, but grounded in the earth. I left academia to start my first company. And here is my first mention in the Wall Street Journal almost 20 years ago. And many more. This company operated on 4 continents. We were valued in the tens of millions of dollars. We had our ups, we had our downs. That led me to business school after that, where I started learning about leadership. I wrote a book that became a #1 best-selling book, Leadership Step by Step. I've written another book since then. So I'm a best-selling author on leadership. I've taught at NYU. This is a review. I have scores of reviews that look just like this. And this is not to promote me, but you'll see later the relevance of reviews like, this is one of the greatest classes I've ever taken. It was engaging, thought-provoking, challenging, fun. Josh is an incredible teacher, mentor, and friend. If I could take this class all over again, I would. So that was me before anything about the environment. But I didn't really think much about sustainability. But in that context, the headlines increased. 1988, global warming was front page news on the New York Times. We haven't really acted on it. You know that you've seen thousands of headlines of it going more on and on and on. This was the context in which I would think there must be a solution to this. And if you asked me what were the solutions to our sustainability, our environmental problems, I would have said at the time, well, #1, vote. Next, we got to create new technologies. With more technologies, we can make things more efficient. And if it's more efficient, we can produce less waste. I hadn't yet known the system's perspective at that point. I certainly thought that nuclear fusion, if we could make power, energy, without coal, without greenhouse emissions, without creating radioactivity, I thought that would solve everything. I certainly thought if we could sequester carbon, if we could take carbon and other greenhouse gases and other pollution out of the atmosphere and put them in the ground somehow, that would work. But these things, fusion, sequestration, there's certain reasons, there's stories I can tell about them that say they're not so effective as people think. And I didn't want to tell every story, but ask me about those stories. But the big thing here is that there's such big solutions. They require government, they require corporations. So at a personal level, I would say, I certainly want to do something, but only governments, only corporations can really make a difference. So I can vote, maybe I can come up with some technology, some changes, but mostly it's out of my hands, and I hope they can handle it. But then I realized that however much it should be government and corporations changing things, that's what I thought, I could still take responsibility for my pollution. And so I gave myself a challenge. Could I go for a week without buying any packaged food? And I really thought this was going to be a miserable week because I live in New York, and my idea was the restaurants here are some of the best in the world. And I got so much variety in the packaged, pre-made food. I expected it would be a chore. It would be a burden. It would be misery. It would be futility. It would take me more time and cost me more money. So here I blogged about it, and I recommend you go to my blog and read my stories about avoiding packaged food. But the main result was that I found the opposite. Despite my expectations, that it would cost more, that it would be more convenient, that it would be more inaccessible to people who didn't live like me. Like, what about someone in a food desert? Actually, I found that a new system based on enjoying what I had. Ask me the story about all the middle steps, about learning to cook and learning to buy directly from my farmers, and how delicious the food has become and how more accessible it is. How people in food deserts invite me to show them how to do what I do because they see it's accessible. So I learned stewardship, resilience, and meaningful, purposeful action where I thought it would be impossible, where I thought it would be the opposite. And that led me to, more than the material change of learning to cook and changing my diet, I came to expect that acting on my environmental values would improve my life. That acting on any of my values of mine would improve my life. And so I acted more and more on these things. Something that I expected would never happen. And I found this message nowhere. I didn't know anyone. I couldn't find any place that was saying, I found many places that said, you have to act because you have to. It's an obligation. If you don't, we're all going to die. Something like that. And you must comply. This is what you have to do. Nothing about, you're going to like it more after you change. But that was my experience. Where was this message? There was no leadership. There's no inspiration. There's no Mandela of the environment. That's what I thought. And I thought, if no one's doing it, and this is important, I chose to take on this mantle, a very difficult choice. To say I'm going to become the Mandela of the environment is, who says I felt like if I fail, people would be like, what were you thinking? Oh, you're going to be Mandela, a great historical figure like that, or Dr. King. And what if I succeeded? I would go up against some of the greatest forces around. I mean, think of the assets behind fossil fuels. So if I failed, I would fail. If I succeeded, I would get pummeled by, you see what happens to people who go up against Exxon and Koch brothers and things like that. But what began with anxiety and uncertainty, reluctance, once I began acting into what has evolved into this sustainable life, action led to determined, values-based, service-based leadership. You saw the list of people that I've worked with on my podcast. They become peers. They refer me to others for us to work together and to grow. And now we want to grow more. So it began with the podcast Leadership in the Environment. It was called Leadership in the Environment. Part of what we're looking for funding for is to rebrand, because we believe that this sustainable life will be more appealing. And the podcast led to these peers. Here's some of them. That led to more and more speaking. And that's led to a community growing. Besides the people who've been on the podcast, some very famous names here. But also this is the page for Leadership in the Environment Sweden. And it's growing into more and more leadership in the environments, and a team that's formed to grow leadership in the environment, the base one in the United States. In particular, after my third TEDx talk, many people came to me and said, Josh, this was at another level. What you do is necessary. It's effective. It's engaging. And no one else does it. You have to get this message out more. It's not getting out as much as it should. And they said, we will help. And that led to a team of 5 people, of experienced professionals, formed, and we said, what can we do together? And because one of them is huge in PR, one of them is huge in television production, and one of them is huge in leadership connections, we said, we should do a TV series. We developed a vision of what we are and what we aren't. And that's the history. We're reaching the limits of what a volunteer team can do, but we have a growing reputation, we have a solid foundation, we're seeing high demand, community is growing, we're becoming more and more effective, we're working together as a team more. And now the stage is to raise funds through tax-deductible donations to realize our vision. The future that we see is for U.S. global culture to shift from I have to steward to I get to steward. I love what I do, not because I have to. My taking over a year to fill up a load of garbage is not about avoiding things. It's about enjoying what I get. It's meeting my farmers. One of the highlights of my year is to go up to the farm and see the stuff that's growing, and to go to the farmer's market. I can get into all of that. But it's more community, more connection, more joy. Embracing stewardship, practicing stewardship, not from obligation, but with enthusiasm. The competition, what's the playing field that we're entering into? First, let's say I got to cover what not competitors. So other nonprofits with sustainability in mind, we work with them. We've already done several events, most recently a panel that was with other nonprofits. We work together. We're not competing. We may be looking for funds from similar places, but we work together. We don't believe that we're competing with people in fossil fuel companies, even leaders. The CEO of Exxon, we don't see as a competitor in the same way that Mandela did not see de Klerk as a competitor. But we believe that they are on our side because they want clean air, clean water, clean land as well. Now our competitors are more polluting systems, industries, as well as government. Government does pretty well continuing to sell off lands and so forth. So these we see as what we're looking to change, what we're up against. Also, as leaders, the beliefs, the values of lethargy, of people believing what I do doesn't matter. Only government can make a difference. Only corporations can make a difference. What I do doesn't matter. That is the main competition, and that's what we're up against. Our competition is beliefs and values. If you're sitting there thinking, oh, I hope you do well, Josh, but it's not really going to make a difference. That's at the heart of what's going on. That's what's driving our behavior. Michael Moss, one of my guests, the best-selling author and Pulitzer Prize-winning author of Salt, Sugar, Fat, How the Food Giants Hooked Us. He knows how industries get people addicted. And he has this great phrase, when people know that they want to do one thing, the healthier choice, and instead they indulge, knowing that in his case it'll make them sick, in our case that'll pollute, that's the addiction talking. You may have seen the movie or read the book Merchants of Doubt. how a handful of scientists obscured the truth on issues from tobacco smoke to global warming. And that book shows how the industries that are benefiting from things that produce global warming, they obfuscate, they deny. Actually, the book Industrial Strength Denial, 8 Stories of Corporations Defending the Indefensible from the Slave Trade to Climate Change, takes it back even historically farther. That is our competition. Centuries of obfuscation, denial, and tactics and strategies that are very effective. That's our competition. That's what we're working against. And it's changed. These things have happened before. And I want to point out, the doomsayers were not the scientists. Say in the case of the ozone hole, and scientists said the ozone hole is decreasing, and if that keeps happening, we will get more sunburn, we'll get more cancer. It could be, they talked about the major problems that could come. They weren't the doomsayers. The doomsayers were the people who said, we need CFCs. If we don't have them, we'll lose refrigeration. Well, my refrigerator works pretty well, and it's not using CFCs. They were the doomsayers who did not have faith in people's ability to innovate, in entrepreneurship, and things like that. They're the doomsayers. Likewise, I live in Manhattan, and some years ago, New York City outlawed smoking in bars. Up until then, everyone's like, smoking? Of course you have smoke-filled bars. That's how it works. And people were concerned that people would leave bars in New York City and go across the river to, say, Hoboken and go to bars there. 2 years later, Hoboken had to ban cigarettes in bars too because people were going from Hoboken to New York City. Exactly the opposite of what people expected. The doomsayers were off. Likewise with cars with leaded gas and all. I highly recommend reading those books to hear about how people had beliefs that if we don't have the slave trade in England, then they'll practice it in France. And they'll practice it in Spain, and they'll practice it in Portugal, and they'll get on profits. Actually, what happened after they outlawed the slave trade in England, England was able to persuade France and Portugal and Spain and other countries to stop it there too. The opposite of what people thought. And a lot of people are saying if the US doesn't pollute, someone else is going to eat our lunch. History says that the opposite will happen, that if we stop, others will stop as well. We could lead, but it's not that we're not leading, we're leading the opposite direction to more pollution. We could lead in the direction of less pollution. And I believe we would set the pace for the world, and that's what gives me hope that if we get started, we're not just going to change a few individuals from this sustainable life, but we can lead a nation and we can lead which will then lead the world. So the sustainable competitive advantage is to be leaders among managers. There's a lot of managers out there, but almost no, maybe no leaders. And so that's what we're going to do. Now we need to differentiate in a world expecting engineering tips and management. Mostly when I say I work on sustainability leadership, people say, oh, what should I do to reduce this? Even major corporations, they say, oh, maybe we should reduce our plastic use, or maybe we should reduce this. They look for management. They expect management because that's all they've seen. They haven't looked for inspiration. They haven't looked for the stories to change the images and beliefs that they have. And that's what we could do. Now, it's possible that others will do it better than us. They'll see what we're doing and they do it better. That is to say, is it a sustainable competitive advantage? Well, I say if someone does it better and passes us by, inspired by us, that's even greater success. If they can do it better than us, that would mean less pollution faster, more joy faster. The problem as we see it in the solution. The lessons from the stories, one of the big lessons is that I believe what I found is that telling people stories about elk and personal experiences of people actually living their lives is significantly more effective than showing them facts and figures that are just too abstract for most people. Likewise, taking an adversarial approach of, well, I do believe that if companies have broken law, we should sue them, but we also have to work with the individuals within them to help them to achieve the goals that we all as humans share. And I think learning from Mandela in that regard could be very effective. To lecture people about this is what happens if it's not nearly as effective as people experiencing these things, like the hula hoop example. There are areas in which we need compliance. We do have to set timelines and so forth. But if you try to drive a system faster than that system can go, you'll often slow it down. So pushing things, seeking compliance beyond what people can comply is less effective, but it inspire them, they can really keep going. Following a crowd versus role models. Most people, they walk into Starbucks, they say, oh, I don't want to get that plastic cup. And they look around, well, everyone else is using a plastic cup, I will too. They don't have role models. That's why LeBron, Serena, Madonna, Oprah, if just a few role models act in a way publicly that others can follow, that can make a big difference. We don't have role models. That's a big part of leadership. We mostly have management alone. We just have the DMV. So the problem solution says science, education, journalism, politics, these things are necessary, but they're insufficient. They alone won't do the job. You may know the author Marshall Goldsmith. He's routinely rated #1 leadership guru and thinker and trainer, and his book title says it pretty well. What got you here won't get you there. Science, education, journalism, and politics, absolutely essential to get us where we are, to know the situation. If we didn't have them, we wouldn't know what to do, but that will not get us across the finish line. I can tell because if you look at the concentrations of CO2 and mercury and plastic, it's all going up. As much as we want it to go down, the hula hoop is going up. So limitations of existing solutions. Scientists, educators, journalists, and politicians. Scientists are very good at learning facts. Educators are very good at spreading the facts. Journalists are very good at getting you to read and watch more journalism, not necessarily to change your behavior. Politicians tend to raise funds. They tend to follow the money more than we call them leaders, but they, in practice, do not lead very well. These are important skills that got us this far, but they rarely change behavior, and they often have conflicting incentives. Journalists, they benefit from having a conflict rather than promoting solutions. That's not their job to promote solutions. That's what leaders do. I want to go through a couple other things that a lot of people expect us to be doing, but it's not our focus. So these are related and important things that we support, but not what This Sustainable Life is doing. We have to narrow down and focus on what we can do well that no one else is doing. So it worked with LA, with the smog in LA, with the ozone hole. You might know about Minamata, was a place in Japan where they dumped a lot of mercury in the water. And measurable things like carbon dioxide, CFCs, plastic and mercury. This gray on the left is not a gray, it's not uniformly gray. This is a picture of LA. I don't know if you can see the building here. In 1968, the smog was terrible, and now we've cleaned it up. Or likewise, the ozone hole. We learned about it in 1979. It was growing. We had data in 79. It was growing. It's shrinking, although it's actually, I hear that it's growing again a bit as people are going around the rules. But this was something that we succeeded at. Minamata, the factory dumping mercury caused terrible birth defects for a generation of people. People didn't know how much pollution, they didn't know how mercury would affect people. We didn't even know about the ozone hole. And there's the Wild West. There weren't rules. Now this is a picture here of waste from factories in Minamata being dumped into the water that people drank, that people fished from, and people didn't know. It was the Wild West. There were no regulations. And so the solution to these things is learn the facts, learn the figures, educate people, legislate, create technology to solve these things. And these are very important things to do. And we support these efforts. We support learning more facts and figures, science, educating, legislation, technology. We support these things. Many people are doing them very well. Great. We want to support them to learn more, to educate more, to legislate more, where people vote for these things. That's something different than what we do. Likewise, a lot of people say, World War II, we turned things around in less than a year. We went from not being in the war to doing everything we could to fight the war. Here's some things that made it happen. These posters, remember Pearl Harbor. Every time you twist a nut, think of Hitler. There was an enemy. And we mobilized against a common enemy, and we had patriotism. The problem it solved, before this, there was a disengaged population. Pearl Harbor changed that. And the solution that it implied was, we got it to say things could be terrible if we don't do this. Doom and gloom, but also patriotism and rallying and mandatory and military service. And we support these things, but that's something different than what we're doing. Likewise, a moonshot. A lot of people say, we need a moonshot. Kennedy said we choose to go to the moon. We choose these things because they are hard. We should choose things that are hard now, today. There was a lack of vision, and he said, this is a vision, and we all bought into it. And it implies, well, we should announce more moonshots. And I hope we do announce some moonshots, things that could solve our environmental issues. And we support more moonshots. But that's something different than what we're doing. Likewise, Mandela, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, many others, they worked with civil rights, apartheid, Indian independence, gross injustices. And it solved unjust laws. Oppressed people lacking authority used civil disobedience to get the people who had control of the laws to say, what are we doing? This is wrong. We must change this. Well, that was changing human laws. But we're looking at natural laws here. We can't quite change the laws of physics. Anyway, there are many organizations that are protesting, when fossil fuel companies knew and they didn't act. We support these efforts as well, but that's something different than what we're doing. Some of the limitations of these existing solutions, they end up telling people to do what they themselves are not. There's a lot of people who are saying you should pollute less, but they themselves are not polluting less. The issue is effectiveness and credibility and integrity, that if you tell people to do something while you yourself are not doing it, you lead other people also to tell other people to do stuff that they themselves don't do. Here's the UN. I'm glad that they're sharing the information that they are with the IPCC and so forth. But they're talking about climate change. Do you really get inspired by the UN? Do they really make you want to change? Do you think that that the members of the UN themselves are polluting less as individuals or as an organization? I don't see it. Al Gore, I'm a big fan of Inconvenient Truth. And I believe what he did was a tremendous leap forward for environmental awareness and things like that. But he has, for better or for worse, he has motivated people who disagree with him as much as people who do agree with him, because they say, look at what he's doing. He doesn't really believe it either. And there are many celebrities, Leonardo DiCaprio comes to mind, who flies around a lot and says people shouldn't pollute so much. Again, I'm not calling people out for saying one thing and doing another, except that they're leading other people to do that. It's ineffective. It's counterproductive. What they did was essential to reach where we are now. And they've influenced many. But I believe we've reached the limits of effectiveness. The people that they were going to lead, who are amenable to following their message, I think they've changed, but the rest, they still haven't. So our focus is not all of those things, but it's going to be something different. Our view is that carbon dioxide, plastic, mercury, they have no volition of their own. Carbon dioxide doesn't cause warming any more than a chainsaw causes deforestation. Those things, carbon dioxide growth, all the greenhouse gases, plastic, mercury, dioxin, PCBs, these result from our behavior. They're inert. We have the ability to choose our behavior. Our behavior results from beliefs, stories, images, systems, experiences that suggest that what I do doesn't matter, culture. And we intend to change culture. That's a leadership thing to do. And systemic change, cultural change, systemic change begins with personal transformation. All of the great historical figures, they went through, people who changed things on national and global levels, they went through a personal transformation. And I'm not aware of any big cultural shifts, cultural changes that happen deliberately without someone, well, usually many people, but at least one person, going through a personal transformation themselves. That's what leaders can, we ourselves go through. I certainly have. And to lead others to go through those personal transformations, to lead yet more. So the problem that we are taking on, role models, stories, emotions, images, systems, this is what we intend to work on. It's not a matter of compliance. This is the domain of leadership. Nearly all past sustainability efforts, management at best. Managers like Gore, DiCaprio, and so forth, they tell people to do what they're not doing. So we tell people to do what we're not doing. That's what we're doing right now in this country, in this world. Even Greta Thunberg calls for panic. Panic is what you do when you don't know what to do. But we see ways to move forward. Also, the message, here's one little thing you can do. I'm sure you've seen many, many articles. Here's one little thing you can do for the environment. It implies you don't want to do it. No one says drinkless driving Monday. No one says seatbelt Tuesday. They say wear your seatbelt all the time because it's always better for you to wear your seatbelt. If you say meatless Monday, it implies you know you want to eat meat. I want to eat meat too. I don't want to give it up, but we have to. From a management perspective, you might get compliance, but from a leadership perspective, you reinforce the beliefs of the system that you're trying to change. It can be counterproductive in the long run. And so the solution is sustainability leadership that billions crave. Everybody cares about clean air, clean land, clean water. Nobody wants mercury in their fish. We bring leadership to create new role models. Think of all those guests on the podcast and the more to come. Think of Oprah. If she just acts a little bit, anything is more than what we have. Stories, images, systems, experiences, community. I gave some of the stories at the beginning. That's why I spent so much time talking about those stories, because that's what we're bringing, among many other things. The podcast has gotten us pretty far, but there's a lot more that we can do. And we're creating community. Community motivates social and cultural change more than facts and figures. Community does. Here's an example. Sandy Reisky was a guest on my podcast. Companies he's started are major producers of wind and solar in this country. In fact, one year, I believe companies he started were responsible for 10% of the entire nation's increase in wind power. He said, Josh, the number one predictor of people installing solar on their home, it's not how much money they would save. It's not government incentives. It's not how much money they make. It's how many of their neighbors already have solar installed. Community, and this behavior, this pattern, you see it also in eating habits, drinking habits, smoking habits, in social cultural behavior. What our neighbors do, people in our community, that influences us more. Right now, there's very few, almost no one who's very well known who's doing it, who's living by these values. That's what I've done on the podcast. I'm very good at doing it with one person, one-on-one, and I'm getting very good at it doing it with corporations. Maya Rosen, I'm saying her name wrong, she's Swedish. She's been not flying for something like 10 years. She described how in Sweden, for 8 of those 10 years, when she would talk about not flying, they would say the same thing that we say here, but I have to for work, I have to for family, blah, blah, blah. They have all these reasons they have to keep flying. About 2 years ago, it shifted. 2 main things she points to. One is that several very well-known Swedish celebrities wrote letters to the editor saying, we're going to stop flying, and they actually did stop flying. The other was that the density, the population of people who choose not to fly, it seems to have crossed a threshold, so that now you need to justify flying. It used to be you have to justify not flying. Now some people say, well, that's Sweden is different than here. I'm not comparing Sweden to the US. I'm comparing Sweden now to Sweden 3 years ago. When communities change, it's very easy for people to change. Let's get more specific. The mission of this sustainable life. Now there's culture and there's behavior. Culture or sustainable, we can have a culture that's unsustainable. That's basically all cultures in the world right now are unsustainable. And you can have sustainable cultures. And you can behave unsustainably and you can behave sustainably. So unsustainable behavior in an unsustainable culture, that's what we have today. And you know what it results in is people feel, well, what I'm doing is good. It's natural. It's right. I mean, they might feel like a little bit like maybe I should produce a little less plastic, but basically they look around and say, I'm doing what everyone else does. It's fine. Well, that's fine. Everyone feels great, but the result is environmental problems. We could end up with 10% the number of humans, the same way that the elk dropped. What most people are doing is management. They're trying to get people to change to sustainable behavior despite culture remaining unsustainable. So what is management without leadership? That's facts, figures, charts. Here's one small thing that you can do. It's tactic, trying to make the system efficient without changing a value of growth first. It's passing laws, but without popular support. And you risk provoking debate, resistance. Think of the number of people who say they view the laws as encroachments on their freedom, even if it would make their world cleaner. So it provokes debate, it provokes resistance, it provokes people disengaging, and it alienates people with other values, even if they value clean air, clean water, clean land. So the result is that we have, in this bottom right corner, without this sustainable life, people behave in a way that they feel is wrong, it's unnatural, if they act sustainably, but the culture remains unsustainable. I can tell you, when I pollute less, people distance, they think they want to show how I can do it, but they can't. So the result is that people resist and often revert. They often go back to unsustainable behavior. Now with leadership, management with leadership, what does that mean? Adding stories, role models, images, experiences. Imagine a few role models not polluting. Imagine having a few experiences like seeing that hula hoop go up, or meeting people who say, even hunters who say, overshooting collapse is a real problem. To create a vision for people to see that what they do can create a future that they like, and to listen, not just tell, to act on the system, not just in the system. And the results there is that if you have sustainable behavior in a sustainable culture, behavior feels good, right, and natural again. People in Sweden who don't fly feel natural about it. That may be impossible for you to believe if you think flying is absolutely necessary for your living and for your family and so forth, as I once did. But it can happen. You'd be surprised. Actually, think more of the smokers. People don't think of restaurants and bars as places to smoke. The result is sustainability, but not just enforced compliance sustainability, but meaningful, purposeful, community-based sustainability that people like. Now, not everyone has moved over into this corner here to behave sustainably. What about people who are unsustainable, who are still behaving unsustainably in an unsustainable culture? With leadership, what will happen there is that they will start feeling like what I'm doing isn't quite right. Someone who feels like they want to smoke inside who tries to smoke inside a restaurant after it's no longer accepted, they'll want to move over here, but it will be very slow. So we still value management. That's why it's very important to keep up. We still support everything that's still going on, because it will move very slowly this way, but much more fast this way. So in all cases, adding leadership to make culture more sustainable benefits. And that brings us to our mission statement. Our mission statement is to bring leadership to sustainability, to change culture, and lead people to love acting in stewardship of nature. Now, some of these terms are vague. So the mission statement goes on for a couple more paragraphs to define what each of these terms mean, because we don't want to be vague. We want to be very explicit of what we're doing and what we're not doing. And this is a mission statement for us internally. This is not a big marketing thing. This is something for us to keep true to ourselves, to stick with the strategy that works. So specifically, humans are lowering the Earth's ability to sustain life and human society through climate change, pollution, resource depletion, and a long list of what we call environmental problems. So that's what we mean by environmental problems, lowering Earth's ability to sustain life in human society. We call raising that ability stewardship of nature. That's what we mean by stewardship. And the movement behind stewardship is sustainability. Now, these problems don't just happen. They result from people's behavior. So many people try to change people's behavior with facts, figures, laws, and other external incentives. That's what we mean by management. And we support effective managers. But behavior doesn't just happen. It results from beliefs, stories, images, role models, experiences, and what we call our hearts and minds. Also systems. Leaders influence hearts, minds, and systems, or collectively we call hearts, minds, and systems culture. Leaders change culture. Today, nearly all human behavior and cultures conflict with sustainability. There are very few places on the planet where people behave sustainably. Changing behavior, but not culture, leads people to feel bad, to feel wrong, unnatural, often to revert and resist. So wrapping it up, this sustainable life brings leadership to sustainability by influencing hearts, minds, and systems, that is culture, so that acting in stewardship of nature feels good. So it feels right, it feels natural to create meaning, purpose, and community. So we're not just about lowering carbon emissions, for example. It's also for people to enjoy it, for people to feel good and right and natural about it. That's the leadership part. That's the emotion part of it. So our vision is a global shift towards stewardship. From fun for myself, I believe every parent has gone through this transition. You used to go out and party and go out whenever you felt like it, and then it's helping those helpless to defend themselves from the consequences of my actions. If you see what pollution does, if you see the mountains of pollution next to farms that people eat from in India, in Indonesia, in everywhere, I mean, the global south, we could say. And that system we are a part of. So we want to shift from fun for myself to helping those to stewardship. And from I have to steward to I get to steward. It is a profoundly meaningful, purposeful, rewarding experience to switch from I just want to see the Eiffel Tower anytime that I want to taking into account how other people behave. If you travel because you want to explore other cultures, you will learn about other cultures more by stewarding them, by making food from local ingredients instead of flying all around the world to get food from their places. That is a movement. Now, if we don't, managers will keep making the system more efficient, resulting in more waste with less work. And that means overshoot and collapse. We are stepping on the gas as fast as ever, but we think it's the brake. We're making the system more efficient, and we want congratulations for it. So for example, we're promoting reusing, recycling, electric vehicles, and fusion instead of reducing. I haven't told the stories about how counterproductive these things can be, but ask me about those stories. We're pushing efficiency at the cost of resilience. We have less and less resilient systems, and small problems somewhere in the world create global problems all over the world because we're less resilient. We're looking to colonize other planets before protecting where we are now. That is to say, we're acting like Hawaii when if we thought we could just trade, we could get resources from other place. We don't keep our Earth sustainable and resilient and regenerative. There are precedents of changes like this. Smoking, for example, when I was a child, smoking meant Humphrey Bogart. That was the image that people connected with it. Now I think more people think of lung cancer. Of course, there's all the data, but very few people know the science. And the science, I'm sure there's conflict in that science as well, but that's not what people think about. It's the images. We have leadership in this area. We have changed culture in this area that we think of smoking as that's a problem. Drunk driving, when I was a kid, people could walk into a bar and say, give me one for the road. They could really be saying, I'm about to drive, give me alcohol. I don't think that would fly today. We've changed culture in this area. There's still drunk driving. There's still smoking. I'm not saying we've completely changed, but it's dramatically, the culture has shifted and the behavior shifted too. Equal rights, when I was a kid, same-sex marriage was weird. People would say it's unnatural. Now, people don't think twice about it. Okay, 2 husbands, 2 wives. That culture has shifted in that area. Have we attain equal rights for different sex and sexual orientations and race and skin color and things like that? No. But culture has changed significantly. It can change. Japan, I talked about Deming. When Deming came there, it was literally bombed out. They were viewed from the entire world as cheap junk, producers of cheap junk. And within 4 years, that changed. Not long after that, Toyota was, several decades later, but Toyota became the largest car company in the world. GM, Chrysler filed for bankruptcy significantly later, but that was a big part of it. Walking on the moon. It's tough to say how big of a change that was. Gearing up to World War II, these are cultural shifts that we were able to make happen. How are we going to do this? What's our strategy? Getting down to the details. Cultural shifts is kind of like a fashion shift. And here's a simple way of looking at fashion. There are a couple global leaders who changed fashion. I don't think of Serena or Madonna. You see them wearing something and suddenly everyone wants to wear new things. Now there's also street fashion and the public, and that changes in a slightly different way. There's also all the stuff in the middle of, most people. They don't really think about it, but they get affected by the global leaders and by street fashion. We intend to work on the global leaders and on the public. More specifically, we work with leaders in all fields: politics, business, sports, culture. You saw the types of people on the podcast, and with more podcast branches, offshoots growing, to reach lots of different areas that I personally don't connect with. The appeal is for people who act to create an enduring legacy, a legacy in an area of demand by billions. I can tell you a lot of the people I talk about, that I talked to on the podcast, they want to have a legacy. It's very meaningful for them. That's why they're well known. If you have all those means and you don't have to be in the public eye. If they choose to be, legacy is a big thing for them. And there's a big legacy to be had here because no one's doing it. And then also to change culture, to motivate votes, to match markets to demand based on new values. Because people want clean air, clean water, clean land. And that's through a TV show, is to reach the public. And I'll talk more about the show in a little bit. Now, these groups influence each other. Just like high fashion people get street fashion people get the most well-known people, we believe that we will do that too. We're not targeting what many other people are doing, which is the middle management, the rest of the people. We want them to keep doing that. We don't want to stop them, but we want to support them actually. And then there's ourselves. So the members of This Sustainable Life, we intend to continue acting with integrity, to give us a credibility for people to follow us, and with humility to nature. We're not making this stuff up. So the stages. At first, we lead local communities, develop leaders in other communities. They lead their communities, and we keep repeating that. Are we going to come up with stuff from scratch that's never worked before? We don't have to. In Edwards Deming, I told you the story. He's got how to apply systems in corporate, industrial. When I say industrial, I don't just mean like factories, but to change whole industries, to change companies and industries. He has a very effective way of doing things. It's evolved a bit since then, and we intend to apply that. Likewise, for people to act now, opposite to what the prevailing winds are saying, great historical figures like Oskar Schindler and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who acted against much more difficult challenges, to say the least. Likewise, George Patton, Dwight Eisenhower. I think of Patton as, today he would be called probably toxic masculinity, but he outright said he loved his men. There was a deep, deep love. This is emotions, this is leaders. And he and Eisenhower, among many other leaders in the military, for example, could lead people effectively to take on huge personal risk. And they did, and we could learn from them. Of course, Mandela, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, these civil rights leaders, tremendous role models for us to learn from. Close to home for me, living in Manhattan, Jane Jacobs. I'm not sure if everyone knows who she is. She wrote The Death and Life of Great American Cities at a time when the culture of the United States was build more roads. Where I live right now in Lower Manhattan would have been a highway if not for her, well, her and many other people. And she took on the power broker, Robert Moses, and the prevailing opinion of there should be more roads. Here, now, some of these people took on major organizational roles, but I want to point out some of the people who have been the most influential people in all of human history. The first women to wear pants in modern times in the West. Newspaper accounts said that they needed police protection, but really all they did was to do what they thought was right. Do you know any women today who have not at some point worn pants? I'm sure there are some, but very few. In other words, their behavior influenced billions of people. They didn't have to do all sorts of organizing civil rights marches and things like that, and yet they were effective, incredibly effective. And a few people doing these things can be all it takes to shift it over. It may take time, it may take some work, but the first women to wear pants are some of the most influential people in all of history. Now, American abolitionists, people who changed from one system to another. Harriet Tubman left slavery and went back into slave territory to bring others back out again. And we're going to need people who learn to act more sustainably and go back in to the unsustainable behavior worlds and say, let's come back out again. Frederick Douglass is another big example. We can learn from them. Now, that's American abolitionists. There's also abolitionists in Britain. A slightly different story, but actually very relevant, because the people in England lived thousands of miles away from where the slavery was happening. They could easily have benefited from it. And there were few individuals. William Wilberforce was one of the major figures. Thomas Clarkson, John Newton. They could have benefited from slavery far, far away. And really, if you look up in the book that I mentioned by Barbara Fries, they could have benefited from it, but they chose not to. And if you think about it, we in the United States, we're benefiting from someone seeing the pollution far, far away. It's a challenge, but we can change our behavior to help others. Machai Viravaidya, whom I mentioned before, I don't know if you can see the things behind him here are condoms. In fact, in Thailand, the condom is often called the Machai, named after him. He was an economist in Thailand, and he was going around and taking data of what people were doing out in the countryside, and he learned in his Western-style education, the solution to economic problems is generally growth. If you have disparities in wealth, if you have unemployment, you can grow out of these problems. And he put into his models growing, economic growth, population growth, and every time it showed, it would exacerbate problems. And he took it on himself, not just solo, but he was one of the major figures, I think this is in the 70s, that he started promoting family planning, the opposite of growth. A lot of people, when they think of family planning and population, they think of racist policies that the United States did. They think of the one-child policy, of forced abortions, forced sterilizations. Think the opposite. Think superhero characters. Think of slogans and giving everyone, all cops, all convenience stores, all had condoms to give out. He would go to schools so that they would play with condoms so that a condom became a natural thing. And in a short period of time, the birth rate went from, I think, 7 children per couple to, I believe, 1.5. No forced anything, all voluntary, all increasing stability, all increasing abundance. So what we do works. In industry, Deming. In politics, Wilberforce. These are our role models. With public, Clarkson, Viravaidya, Schindler, Tubman, Bonhoeffer. These are all people who the public can follow. Among the elite, Muhammad Ali. That's another story. Ask me about why Muhammad Ali can be such a great role model for major public figures. To get this started, what does a sustainability leader need? It's not just any old leader can do this. Some leaders are effective in some areas and others are effective in others. But we believe that experience is necessary in science to understand what's going on, in business, because that's where the biggest changes are going to come from. And also there's a business behind organizing all these people, but also to take initiative and entrepreneurship to get this thing started. Leadership, that's what's missing. Public speaking, that's one of the major pieces of how to implement leadership. And to have credibility, living sustainably, this leader has to do it him or herself, to have integrity so that people can follow, and not just tell other people to do while they don't do it themselves, and to love doing the relevant grunt work. So you know a bit about me. I check off all of these things. Am I the only one? I'm not sure, but I'm capable, I'm able, and I love doing the work. And there's a team that's formed around me. So there's me. Well, I won't go into all the details, but you can pause, but I've talked about this stuff before. I've been flown by choice since March 2016. It takes me over a year to produce a load of garbage. I picked up at least one piece of street trash per day since April 2017. So Alton Christensen is a producer and a content developer for broadcast and online. He's worked with Bill Moyers for 6 years. He's done American Experience in Nova. The Kid Stays in the Picture he did major work on, which did very well at Cannes. Jill Golden, I can't go into all the details with her, but she's worked with billion-dollar projects, and she's worked with major figures, Oprah, Baryshnikov, and she has her own team, and she is deeply passionate about working in nonprofits And you should hear her talking about people who want to behave more sustainably but haven't figured out how. She wants to be part of this. Soren is a major online marketing. He'll be more behind the scenes, but he knows how to build this. And in today's world, online is major. Sarah MacArthur. The bold names on the slide are people who have been named #1 leaders in various ways. And she was CEO for Marshall Goldsmith Inc. She's worked with Alan Mulally, who was CEO of Ford and Boeing. She's written, I think these are all number one best-selling books with Frances Hesselbein, who's named the best leader in America by Peter Drucker, Marshall Goldsmith, Lawrence Lyons. The people that Alan knows, that Frances knows, that Marshall knows, she knows, very well connected. And the team is growing, including the hosts of podcasts that are starting in Sweden, Italy, London, Kyoto, Brooklyn, and more to come. So Leadership in the Environment, or soon to be, we're changing to This Sustainable Life, is starting new offshoots in those areas to reach audiences that I personally would not reach on my own. And we expect that to grow and grow and grow. Oh, so there's Leadership in the Environment Sweden. There it is coming from London. And of course, let's not forget all these peers. So the specific projects and the use of funds. So the podcasts, it was one, now it's more. The TV series, to continue writing more books, to continue organizing events, executive training, direct training for CEOs and leaders to learn sustainability leadership, an online curriculum so that everyone can learn how to behave more sustainably, media appearances to get me and the other leaders' messages out there, and a website and online community. Why did I start a podcast? Because it was accessible. I needed a microphone and a place to host it. I could do that. But why continue? Because it reaches leaders. Leaders love to act on sustainability if they're led to it, not just dumped on them. Also, on a personal level, I've developed myself, my technique, my audience. So it's growing and growing and growing, and it keeps growing. So the next thing is to have more offshoots in more and more places with reaching more and more audiences, not just geographic. There can be national leadership or This Sustainable Life. It could be California, but it could also be leadership in the environment, politics, leadership in the environment, sports. If someone wants to start, I train them, get them started, and then they go off and do it on their own. That's what's happening with these other offshoots. They can, and to reach more and more influential guests, and a big thing is to promote it, to get a larger and larger audience. The TV series is a response to the third TEDx talk that people who were connected and know how to get the word out said, this is, you've got to get out there much more, and we will help with our expertise and our experience. The vision in Hollywood speak is Carl Sagan's Cosmos meets I Have a Dream, meets Inconvenient Truth without the politics. I want to point out Carl Sagan's Cosmos is a personal voyage, and there's a very big personal element to this. So the next stage is to develop and to propose and to go into production after that. Books, well, I'm already a best-selling author. I have a new and effective view of how to look at the environment and how to behave. I have an integrated, comprehensive way of living that I think others will like on its own, and it's also much more sustainable. Also, books lead to media appearances and to get the voice out there, to get the message out there much more. So the vision is a book of stories, of role models, of visions, not just be told what to do and say this is, the world is all going to fall apart and here's all the science behind it. Those books, I'm glad that they're out there, but this book is not out there. So the next stage is a book proposal that takes a bit of freedom from day-to-day stuff, takes a bit of funds. Events. Why start? To activate the podcast guests. Actually, one of the people who couldn't participate in too many people said yes for the panel, and one was like, what more can I do? And so she was a major figure in helping promote it, and we were 4 times oversubscribed. People really want to do this. Not just be told what to do, but to give a chance to act, to create stories and visions and role models for others. So the vision is to create a community of leaders publicly sharing and acting on sustainability values, their values, not me telling them what to do. It's a very useful, important distinction. I don't tell them what to do. I ask them if there's something that they would like to do so that listeners can hear their foibles, their challenges, what works, what doesn't work. It's not so easy. I'm not creating a Disney version of what to do. And so these events give people a chance to get that out there. So the next thing is to book more events. It takes time and money. Executive training is systemic change begins with personal transformation. This is an opportunity for leaders, CEOs, every company out there, their shareholders, their customers, their suppliers, their employees, everyone knows they must be more sustainable. few leaders know what that means and what to do. It's much easier for them not to act. They don't want their finger to come disconnect from the hula hoop, and so the hula hoop keeps going up. I've worked with some of the top leaders in the world, and I can lead them to where they know how to lead their companies. And whether it's companies or organizations or governments, that they will enjoy new values that are sustainable values. So the next stage is, actually, I had a lot of deals that were about to go down in January and February of 2020, and the pandemic changed all that, but to restore the pre-pandemic interest and keep growing that market. And we believe this will be a money-making, a revenue-generating part of the business. And that's already happening. I was recently contacted by a Senate campaign. You might have seen several mayors, federal and state legislators, CEOs have come to us already to ask us for this. So that's growing even without us. The online curriculum, why do that? Well, I'm an award-winning project-based educator. People want to act if they expect success, and if they know what to do, they do need some walking into it. It does help to get an education practice and training into doing this. So the vision is to create a simple step-by-step path to master stewardship and to create an online alumni community of people who've acted and help each other. The next step is to really hire someone who can make that an online business, to enable people to take these courses and start acting on their own widely, and then to create communities of people who've done that. Media appearances, because people have to hear about it. I mean, we have to promote, to publicize and normalize this lifestyle, and to build on appearances. I've already been in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, CNN, everything, for my various entrepreneurial stuff before and also for what I'm doing now. But we want to build that and grow that. So the vision is to meet media demand for more people like Greta. There are people who disagree with her, people who don't like that, but there are many people who want more people who are living with integrity, in a way that's sustainable, in a way that they can follow. So the next step is to promote me through public relations and media training, that's her home territory. She knows how to do it. And of course, the webpage and online community. Why? Because we need to complement, there's lots of management tools out there. Here's one little tip that you can do. We want to augment that with community, with leadership. And the vision is to be the go-to site or a go-to site for sustainability leadership community, and to have resources, online communities where people could talk to each other and share what works and share what doesn't work and things like that. And so the next stage is to build a basic site. Wrapping this up, the offer that we offer to you is that we believe that we are doing essential, effective work that no one else is. It works. We've seen it work with great leaders in many areas in the podcast. We will do what it takes to create a global culture of, I don't have to steward, I get to. We're seeking a couple $100,000 in tax-deductible funds through the development stage of the TV series, and then in a couple $1 million to begin production. Will you help contribute? Before you answer that, I want to give a little personal message about sports and icebergs. When I was in college and beyond, I played sports. I was pretty good. I played at the Nationals a couple times. I played at Worlds. There were times that we played against teams that were very good. There were times that we played against teams that weren't at our level. Sometimes we played against a team that wasn't at our level, and we didn't play up to our level, and we barely won. And we didn't feel good about that. There were times that we played against teams that were above our level, and we lost, but we felt great because we played above our level. But what really gets me, things that wake me up in the middle of the night, even today, was when there was a game that we could have won, but I didn't give my all. Either in the game, I played at 90%, or in practice, I didn't practice as much as I could have. And we lost because I didn't prepare enough. I didn't give my all. You prefer to win, but what really the measure of how you feel, how I feel, is what we gave relative to our potential. Now, it may be that this ship that we're on is heading to the iceberg. It looks like we're going to hit the iceberg. I believe we've already hit it in some sense. We've already bounced off a couple icebergs in the iceberg field. In that, as I mentioned, 10 million people a year are dying from pollution. You saw what happened with the mercury poisoning. It's already happening. We can't go back to the way it was of some idyllic past. But we don't have to hit the iceberg full on and sink right away. One thing we can do is we can do the equivalent of steering away, of pulling back on the throttle and doing the best that we can. It may be that we have to hit it, but there's a difference between hitting it full on and sinking right away, or glancing off of it and maybe we get a few injuries, but we can still sail. Or there's see there's levels of disaster. A lot of people think, well, there's nothing we can do. We might as well just enjoy the ride. Everything that we can do makes a difference. And there's levels of disaster. There's full disaster, and everything that we do now can make a difference. And I measure my success, and I believe that we all measure our success, how we feel about what we've done, by what we've done relative to our potential. And this sustainable life, we will give everything that we've got. We're looking for resources to be able to give more, but we believe that we can make the difference on a national and global level. We hope that you'll help. Will you help contribute?